the FASB accounting change. So this is bloody niche, right? Like most people have no idea what even this thing is. I, as a experienced investor, don't even really know what it is. But in the United States, publicly traded equities are accountable to this accounting board. And in particular, it's interesting because they changed the rules. And there was the pre-2024 rules and the post-2024 rules, specifically in relation to Bitcoin and how Bitcoin is accounted for. And what it means is that the shift in how you account for Bitcoin on the balance sheet of your company, let's say your MicroStrategy or Block or Tesla that own Bitcoin on the balance sheet, every quarter, the price gain or loss of Bitcoin gets marked to market and it counts as earnings. So in a sense, the balance sheet is actually now able to create revenue. So even though you just sat and owned Bitcoin for 3 months, quarter to quarter, and you haven't sold it, you haven't lent it to anyone, you've done literally nothing but just sit on it. If it does a 10% shift to the upside, then if you're holding 100 grams worth of Bitcoin, it looks like from an accounting perspective, you just made $10,000. And so this is a massive deal. And shout out to a new friend of mine on Nostr called Jason the Original that I only came across due to his post yesterday. Basically, everyone needs to pay attention. This is a big shift. And it highlights a number of things. So for me, first of all, what I'll talk through is the idea of being ruled by rules and not by rulers. And so one of the reasons that I have come to love Bitcoin is because it doesn't change. That's why it gets called things like a pet rock. But since 2009, when it launched, the rules that govern the system have remained almost identical to when they started. The network has grown over time in terms of strength due to the improvements that have been made to it by Bitcoin core developers and anyone else that's combed through the open source software and gone, this doesn't quite make sense, or maybe we could make the UX better by making this change. And those updates are called BIPs. And the underlying rules of the system, they haven't changed. Fixed supply of 21 million, issuance schedule over 100 so years. Now, what FASB have done is they've basically changed the rules. Let's take MicroStrategy as an example. The Bitcoin MicroStrategy now owns on its balance sheet can effectively be used to represent revenue. So they're not selling the Bitcoin, they're not loaning it to anyone, it's literally just holding it on the balance sheet. And if Bitcoin goes up in price over a quarter, then that increase in the value of the Bitcoin counts as revenue for that business. Now, this is a radical change, right? Since when does the balance sheet of a business represent revenue? So you're not selling anything, you have a product, you're literally just a Bitcoin balance sheet play that people are then buying equity in. Now, either they're raising debt, so they're selling bonds, or they're selling different types of equity shares, so preference shares or at the market shares, different ways of kind of getting access and exposure to MicroStrategy. And again, this gets pretty niche, right? Like how many investors are looking at this stuff? How many investors understand the difference between convertible notes, i.e. the bond investors, or people who are buying equity straight from the market? I don't think it's many people. And admittedly, even myself, that's why, shout out to Jason. This has hit me so hard in the last 24 hours. It's like, hang on a second. So the accounting rules are changing. Now, I knew this was happening, but forgive me, I wasn't looking closely enough. And one of those reasons is because I'm just long Bitcoin in self-custody. I'm not actually looking to reallocate into anything else. And lots of other people spend plenty of time doing that. Like, how can I outpace Bitcoin? Well, one way of doing that is potentially buying leveraged equities in the public markets that have taken on Bitcoin in their treasury. And it's working very well for some people. That's something I might look at in maybe 6 to 10 months once I see a liquidity opportunity for a market top with Bitcoin itself. It's like, okay, maybe it makes sense to take some profits off the table, sit on that for maybe another 6 to 12 months, and then reinvest at the bottom of the next cycle if I believe that's actually going to happen at the time. I do think it will. I don't think cycles are disappearing by any means. But since when can balance sheet growth, so net asset value change, count as revenue? Whoa. Now to peel back the layer in terms of like how do you value things? Well, obviously value is subjective, as we've discussed. And so an individual investor will have a different opinion of different things at different times. And I love that, right? If you're wrong, your money's gone. Or it's not as much as it was before, i.e. you buy something right now and the market actually sells off and you were wrong. Or you got the timing wrong, which is like actually you should have held it for longer than you did, or whatever the case might be. So you need to have strategies around entry points, like when are you going to buy it? Not only what are you going to buy, but when, and then also when you might sell. And so I'm like, holy shit, this actually isn't what I thought, where it's like, okay, if it's common knowledge that you can take Bitcoin onto the balance sheet, like why won't lots of other entities start doing that? And they might well do that, right? So instead of buying MicroStrategy, you can go and buy lots of other different things that are essentially a quasi-Bitcoin play. But none of them will have as many Bitcoins as MicroStrategy, which means the value of MicroStrategy is going to increase faster. Now, of course, things might be proportional, so that let's say a smaller company takes on a significant amount of Bitcoin that's percentage-wise similar to a MicroStrategy, then maybe you can ride the same speed of growth if other investors are looking at the same thing. I don't know. And this is what I'm keen to learn more about and find out. But it's just one of those crazy things. Oh, so hang on. They're changing the accounting rules. And if they change the accounting rules, then basically it's that, like, the map is not the territory. And so you might be using a certain map, but that map's now old and it's shifted. And this is where it's basically information arbitrage. Like, people are using information to their benefit before other people get hold of it. Incidentally, that's what I argue Bitcoin is, full stop, right? I'm just extraordinarily lucky to have drawn the dots together in a way that was like, oh, wow. Not only do I think this has a huge chance of success, the market's massively undervaluing it currently, and actually it represents something I think can bring a far, far brighter future than what the status quo financial system represents. Okay, I'm in. Let's do this. And, number of years into the journey now, here we are. And it's like, oh, look, they've just changed the accounting rules. What's going to happen next? And so where does this take me to? It's like, okay, we're talking about fundamentally different systems. Like, Bitcoin represents an entirely different system. Peer-to-peer electronic cash. Wow. So when you're buying into it and you're holding self-custody, it's just a completely different world to the stock market, to the bond market, to regulated equities. And that's okay. And you can embrace that and you can use that to your own benefits. So where will the public markets shift? Well, obviously, if you can get paid in terms of equity return for having Bitcoin on your balance sheet, well, people are going to get into it. So what does this mean? Perhaps huge demand for Bitcoin coming in.